I'm not as confident in our intelligence service as I'd like to be. What made the OSS so good is that it tapped into the talents of the American people. Again, just people who know how to get things done. They're in all walks of life. Go through the list of senior intelligence officials, all through the Bush administration and into the Obama administration. You won't find one outsider. They're all professionals, sort of like the military. Now, look, there are a lot of good guys in there. But the notion that you would build an intelligence service without tapping into all the talents in your population is crazy.
From Julia Childs to Captain Kangaroo.
Yeah, there's just a lot of talented people. You know, I could put together a bunch of 3 or 4 dozen people. They'd find bin Laden in a month. And one of those people would know how to make my cell phone work wherever we're going. You know, grab them from Verizon or, you know, AT&T or something. So the answer is it's an intelligence service, and somehow the notion has gotten through in Washington that it's got to be all insiders. Now, look, there are some wonderful people on the inside. I don't mean that there aren't. But, you know, if President Obama appointed a professor of history as chairman of the Joint Chiefs, the place would explode. You can't do that. Yeah. But in intelligence, you can. They're different skill sets. Sure. So the answer is all we have are insiders, professional people. And again, some of them are marvelous people. We owe them a lot of our gratitude.
But you're looking for some fresh ideas.
You're looking for some fresh ideas, some fresh talent, for new ways of doing things. And the notion now is that's not allowed. Yeah. That's crazy.
People who aren't part of the climate, you know, the current. Yeah. Yes.
If memory serves me right, George H.W. Bush was the ambassador to China and head of the CIA prior to being Reagan's vice president. And I was wondering if there was any collaboration in the Reagan administration with he and Casey, or if in fact was there tension? Was it of value to have George H.W. Bush under those circumstances?
Yeah, George H.W. Bush had been CIA director for a matter of months. And by the way, he was very highly regarded out there. Sure. They thought he did a really good job for, he was there a short time, but he did a good job.
They named the building after him.
Yeah, well, that's different. But no, he was quite highly regarded. And he and Bill got along. But if there was a fight within the Reagan administration, you've written about this in your books, it wasn't left versus right or liberal versus conservative. The real fight, what split the administration apart, was on the one side you had the Reaganauts who wanted to win the Cold War. And on the other hand, you had the Bushies who didn't want to lose the Cold War. I mean, that's what the fight was about. So there was that real tension between Vice President Bush and Reagan and Casey on the other. I mean, they got along, they worked together. And, yeah,
but they always thought you guys were too aggressive.
But they thought that was nuts.
Yes.
Yeah, they really thought that was nuts.
Sure.
And if you sort of caught them secretly, they thought Reagan was an idiot. They thought the idea that you could actually defeat the Soviet Union was quite lunatic and probably going to blow up the world.
Yeah, right.
And that was the real tension in the administration.
Oh. Go ahead. Sure.
I've recently seen on TV some ads for the CIA recruiting. This is a two-part question. First of all, do you think that's a good thing or a bad thing? And second of all, would you have done that in your administration?
Yeah, I mean, it's always a good idea to go out and try and get the best people you can, but what it comes down to is when people answer those ads, who are you going to get? So sure, you want to get bright young people, and that's a wonderful thing to do. So that I'm in favor of. In the same sense, in any organization, you want to bring in some fresh talent. But at the same time, you've got to bring in some of the people at the top, and that's what they won't do.
Sure.
My concern, and by the way, I've seen this happen, is they bring in some really wonderful people, kind of people who graduate from this college, have a few years' experience under their belts, and then you're putting them under some mid-level bureaucrat, and they won't stay. The young people won't stay. They're not getting anything done.
They get frustrated.
They get frustrated and off they go. So you've got to combine both.
Somebody who says, this isn't the report I want to see.
That's not why I came here. Yeah, I didn't come here to not lose and play bureaucratic games. I want to get these guys.
Yeah.
And if they're not doing that, then the good people leave. And that's what tends to happen.
Mr. Meyer, thank you very much for your information this evening. Back in September of 1983, the Russians shot down KL Flight 007. And I have papers at home that showed that the airliner, landed on Sakhalin Island. That was the initial reports. And then there was always talk about there being some survivors, including perhaps the Congressman McDonald from Georgia. Well, that event happened. I just wanted to know, how did that ever come close to triggering a response on our behalf against Russia? And then that was followed up by the Marine barracks being bombed the next month. Then we went into Grenada the next month. Were they all tied together as a package of responses?
That's a very good question.
The Russians had denied it initially that they had shot down the airplane.
Yeah. They were tied together in a very interesting sense. Remember what I said earlier? That was a much more dangerous moment in history than people realized. Mm-hmm. You were watching a nuclear superpower possibly going down.
Yeah. Under Andropov.
Under Andropov. And the danger was, would they go for the nuclear trigger or go down? What would they do when you stepped on their oxygen line? And so you had things like KAL-7. It was terrifying. They shot it down. By the way, there's no way you can mistake a 747. It doesn't look like any other airplane. Okay? They knew what they were doing. Okay? They shot it down.
Killed about 300 people.
Killed about
80
300
Americans.
people. But see, this is where President Reagan was so extraordinary. Yeah. You had a lot of people in the United States, particularly in the Republican right, who said, that's it, go launch a war, get the guy. Reagan said, cool it. Mm-hmm. He was going to bring this down gently. No matter what happened, he was going to bring it down gently. Then we had the Marine barracks. They blew up our embassies in Beirut. They killed 241 Marines. Now, this gets to be an interesting thing because of what you asked. One of the great questions is, why didn't we do anything? Why didn't we retaliate? Fair question. Mm-hmm. Can I tell you an interesting story about that? I was sitting with Bill one afternoon. He had some project he wanted me to do. Doesn't matter what it was, but it was something. And he had sort of a file folder like you've got in your hands. And he told me what he wanted to do. And he gave me instructions like I was an idiot. Walk to door, turn handle, that kind of thing. And I was getting madder and madder. He treated like a jerk. And finally, he just threw the file folder at me. Just threw it in my lap and said, well, just do the best you can. Don't bother me with it. And I got up. I was stomping out of his office. And he said to my back, he said, I could do that better than you're going to do it. So I stopped, and I was just going to let him have it. You know how you've had it on a bad day? And I turned around, I was going to blow the whole career. And I saw he was laughing. So I caught myself, and I said, well, thanks, Bill. That's a morale booster. I really appreciate it. He said, sit down. I'm going to tell you something. I sat down, and he said, listen. He said, if you're an absolute genius, you can accomplish two things. That's the genius level. You can't get more than two things done. It's like exceeding the speed of light, okay? If you're a genius, you can do two things. If you're just brilliant, you get one thing done. So if you think you're a genius, figure out the two things you want to do, then get everything else the hell off your desk. Because if you try and do more than two things, you'll blow it. He said, the reason executives fail is because they cannot take the punishment when everything else goes wrong. So they try and do more than two things and they blow it. But if you can take the punishment when everything else goes wrong, you can actually do the two things. And I remember sitting there thinking, whoa.
What's he trying to tell me?
No, I knew what he was trying to tell me. That's how the big boys play. That was the greatest management lesson I ever heard in my life.
So in other words, they weren't going to respond to Beirut.
Yeah. Reagan did two things. He won the Cold War and he ignited the greatest economic boom in modern history. That's all he did.
Yeah.
Didn't do anything else,
right.
Okay?
Right.
When the barracks went up, what almost no one understood is we were this close to winning the Cold War. And the president wasn't going to let anything throw us off course. Now, whether that was a good decision or a bad decision, people can argue for the next 10 centuries.
And then we invaded Grenada 2 days later.
Yeah. But he, I mean, of course, he knew that was underway. Mm-hmm. But the point is, again, people can argue whether we did the right thing or the wrong thing. But that was Reagan. He was going to do the two things and nothing else. Because if he tried to do more than two, he's going to blow it. Isn't that interesting? And that's why we didn't respond.
It's focus, vision, leadership.
Focused. They can criticize him, but that's why we didn't
And understanding of the world. You can't do everything.
Can't do everything. But pick the right two things.
Jimmy, go ahead.
Thank you for being here, Mr. Meyer. I appreciate it. We're all pretty well familiar with some of the great Russian literary leaders of the time, Chekhov and Dostoevsky, but what struck me is one man in particular who stood up in the realm of literature, and that would be Alexander Solzhenitsyn. And so my question to you really has to deal with the literary effect of undermining socialism and communism in that particular era, and what you think was the effect of such literature. Did it really provide a solution in undermining the ideology that was presented, and how effective do you think it really was in doing so?
The answer is yes, and I'll tell you an interesting story. Okay, all you got to do is keep me out of prison on the way home. Okay?
Try.
We found out, okay, I wasn't going to tell you this, but this is too good not to. We found out that every night when office workers in the Soviet Union would go home and close up the offices 5, 6 o'clock, a KGB officer would go through the office and remove the typewriter ribbon from every typewriter and lock it in a safe.
Wow.
And then come in at 6 o'clock in the morning and replace every typewriter ribbon. And our spies were going nuts trying to figure out what's going on. There's a shortage of typewriter ribbons. What the hell is going on? Why are they locking up typewriter ribbons?
I know I can't ask this, but how did you guys find that out?
You're right, you can't ask it.
Right.
And we're going nuts. What the hell are they locking up typewriter ribbons? Finally got it. At night, people, Russian workers, would come into their office, sit at the typewriters, and type copies of Alexander Solzhenitsyn's novels. That's how they distributed them. This was the samizdat, the underground thing. They would type Solzhenitsyn's novels and other underground literature. That's how they made copies. They didn't have Xerox machines they could use. So they started locking up the typewriter ribbons. Now, as soon as you hear, they go, what? And this is part of the memos I wrote to the president. This was 1983, 1984. We were just beginning to get personal computers. We were learning new words like software and programming. And our kids were beginning to learn these things faster than we were. And they're locking up typewriter ribbons.
Yeah,
Okay?
Sure.
Suddenly, you see the gap opening between the two societies. And it's a productivity gap.
A technology
really.
gap.
It's a technology gap, right? Because the CIA said they're producing 3% growth every year with shoes and steel and coal and things. And we're producing 3%, but it was software, technology, things like that, medicine, pharmaceuticals. Well, to a second-rate analyst, 3% is 3%. But wait a minute, shoes and coal and steel is not the same thing as software, computers, and pharmaceuticals. And when you realize that we're learning software, and words like software and program, and they're locking up typewriter ribbons, suddenly, and I remember sending that to the president, and suddenly you see, wait a minute, this gap's opening up. So the answer to your question is, yeah, the Solzhenitsyn stuff was important.
He just died last year.
Yeah.
Solzhenitsyn.
And, oh yeah, what he did to bring down the Soviet Union is extraordinary. But they were locking up typewriter ribbons to stop it. So there you go.
I think we probably do one more question. Daniel, go ahead.
The last time the economies of some of the smaller Eastern European countries like Moldova and Estonia, Latvia, Belarus, those countries, last time that their economies collapsed and their governments went into massive debt, we saw a revolt and the collapse of the Soviet Union. What's going to happen this time as those governments are facing debt in the tens of trillions of dollars, and how important is it to get the global economy stable once again because of that?
It's a good question. It's very important to get it stable. There are two problems. First is the economics of Estonia and Latvia and Lithuania. They've got economic problems like we do, and they're smaller, and it hurts them even more. But Putin's out there, and he's fishing in troubled waters. And the message that I hope we're able to send is, hey, buddy, back off. We don't need trouble here. So I think what they're looking at in Moscow right now is how can we take advantage of this, as opposed to how can we help everybody get through this. Again, I don't think there's going to be a second Cold War, but this could get a little bit sloppy. And, let's just hope the president's up to it, and we wish him well, and hope he's the greatest president in American history.
And we do wish him well.
Yeah, we wish him well.
Yeah. And that's a good note to stop.
Okay.
And speaking of what to do in the future, you've got DVDs on sale outside, and you're going to be signing and selling DVDs.
How you sign a DVD, I don't know.
I don't know,
I'll be happy
but we're going to figure it out. We're going to figure it out. So thank you very much, and thank all of you for coming.
Thank you. Thank you.